It is a huge game tonight. You just heard it. Kentucky has won 8 of their 9 matchups since John Calipari started coaching the Wildcats. But Rick Pitino's Cardinals had the more recent national championship, winning it all in 2013. Stephen A., how much has Calipari hurt Pitino's career over the years?
Well, let me say this. The record would not indicate that. Rick Pitino is a national champion, won a national champion in Louisville 4 years ago. He's been to like 3 Final Fours in the last 5 or 6 years or so. So from a production standpoint, no. But when you think about college basketball, Max, and the sizzle that used to come with it, now, no doubt the NBA's ridiculous, one and done rule, 19 years old, 1 year in college, and then you could go to pros. That sort of hurt the college game. There's no doubt about that. But when I think about Calipari and these All-Americans, one after another, Louisville's right up the road, and they all keep going to Kentucky. I mean, you got Malik Monk dropping 47 the other day. You got Isaiah Briscoe there. You had John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins and the crew. I mean, you just look at these crew, Karl Anthony Towns and the Harrison twins and everybody else. I mean, everywhere you turn, that all these guys go to Kentucky. Ain't nobody going to Louisville. Louisville's winning. Rick Pitino's a hell of a coach, but the All-Americans, the sizzle, clearly is at Kentucky and Duke. More so than anybody else, and I just don't understand it.
Stephen
I
A.,
really don't.
I have a hot take for you. You ready? Get your oven mitts ready. John Calipari has helped Rick Pitino because Calipari prefers it that way.
Calipari
Has essentially invented modern college basketball. He was the one who saw the way it was going and went with it. So he's not considered like a blue blood coach like Izzo or Roy Williams or someone like that, but he is probably the key historical figure of this college basketball era. He's the guy who invented it, basically, and showed everyone else how to do it.
So how does that help Pitino?
Including Rick Pitino, because Pitino is a coach in this era.
But how has it helped Pitino?
He's been largely imitated by successful coaches, Stephen A., including Rick Pitino.
There once upon a time in the sport of college basketball, when Calipari, he was at UMass, and then he came to the NBA, and then he went to Memphis and all of this other stuff. But Pitino was arguably the man. Yeah, there was Dean Smith and then Coach K, and then Roy Williams was at Kansas before he went to UNC.
Right.
And Jim Calhoun, yes, you can't forget him, the great Jim Calhoun. But the fact of the matter is Pitino was like, it flew off the tongue when you thought about college basketball. He was synonymous with
Calipari
it. Now when you think about his Calipari and Coach K.
And Calipari was considered the imitator mainly because his last name also ended in a vowel and he's from the Northeast, basically, so they reminded people of Pitino. But in fact, it's Calipari who's been the innovator and basically invented this modern era of one-and-done guys.
All I'm just talking about is sizzle. We know that Bill Self, Rick Pitino, all of these guys are great and they produce. I'm just saying in terms of name recognition, cachet, and in terms of brands that carry the sport of college basketball, you don't really think much about Rick Pitino these days.
Right.
And I think it's because of Calipari.
Yeah, he surpassed him. I'm looking forward to these two going head-to-head, of course, tonight. Let's stay with college hoops for a moment, gentlemen. Iowa head coach Fran McCaffery not too pleased at the end of their game against North Dakota. After North Dakota's Corey Baldwin stole the ball away as the clock was winding down, McCaffery was so annoyed, he told his team, get off the court without shaking hands with their opponents this morning. McCaffery told our Jeff Goodman that he regrets his no handshake decision and texted the North Dakota coach to apologize. So obviously, heat of the moment there. Max, what's your reaction to that?
I think the lesson is even the bad boy Pistons eventually, who have no regrets about anything, eventually regretted not shaking hands with the Bulls when the Bulls swept them and really beat them up in that series. The moral of the story, boys and girls, is when the game is over, you shake hands.
That's obvious. I would say this. Here's the bigger point. These are college kids. You're a grown man, probably married, probably have children. You are a leader of young men. You have to set an example. His frustration may have been warranted. But you have to conduct yourself as an adult, even more so when you're leading kids and young men into manhood. He did not do that. He dropped the ball in a written statement. It's not enough. He should be on camera apologizing. That's all that's required, but he should at least do that because it was a juvenile thing for him to do as the coach, not to shake hands with an opponent.
No question. Caught up in the heat of the moment, needs to set a precedent, but clearly he's regretful there. Coming up next. Meanwhile, earlier this week, we finally saw video of Oklahoma running back Joe Mixon punching a woman in 2014. We warn you, this video is disturbing. Now we have video of Mixon after the incident, telling police that it felt like a dude hit me when Amelia Molitor slapped him and that he punched her as a reaction. Here's Mixon explaining his version of the events leading up to the assault.
We had no problem with her. She was just being disrespectful, you know, coming smoking in my face and getting acting crazy. So after that, the gay dude, he was just like, he called me something. He was like, so then I was like, what? I was like, you got me messed up. And then I called him a and after that, the girl, she dropped her purse. That's when she came in my face, pushed me, and then my glasses came off, and then like I had like jumped at her like to watch out. And I was like, watch out. And then she came in my face. I put my head down and she swung on me. And after that, like I was so shocked because she hit me so hard. It felt like a dude hit me. And like after that, like my face hit, just like boom. And like my reaction was just right there.
So to be clear, Mixon told police that he heard a racial slur from Molitor's male friend, but not from Molitor herself. And Mixon admitted that he responded with an anti-gay slur at the male friend. Stephen A., does this latest video change anything for you and your stance?
Yes, it does. It changes it because I think it makes him look worse, not better. So let me get this straight. A man, you bring up the issue of a racial slur, which has absolutely nothing to do with you hitting the woman. But the racial slur came from a dude, but you hit the girl. What sense does that make? I mean, you sound like a flaming idiot. I mean, it doesn't make any damn sense whatsoever. It makes him look worse as far as I'm concerned. There's no excuse for it. And by the way, yes, she hit him first. Yes, she had no business hitting him. And that's a different subject to discuss because men don't need to go around and get hit either. But it doesn't negate the fact that you're 6 feet, 226 pounds. You're clearly the male in this equation. And by the way, if you have the wherewithal to strike her, why couldn't you have the wherewithal to grab her and prevent her from hitting you? Why couldn't you do that? Or to make sure that she doesn't get in your face? You could have grabbed her to refrain her from hitting you without hitting her. You chose not to do that. And then to sit down and to talk, you're basically trying to justify your idiocy and your belligerent behavior. And there's simply no excuse for it. As far as I'm concerned, it made him look worse. The video of him hitting the girl was bad enough. But now that we've heard his explanation, he didn't just look criminal, but he sounded like an idiot. And I think this is the kind of thing that's going to come back to haunt him when it comes to him getting drafted by somebody. I really do.
Yeah, I look at this and see that he knows he's been caught red-handed. It's on video. So it sounds like, and I have no way of knowing whether or not he's telling the truth, but whether he is or he isn't, it sounds like someone who is looking for the things that would somehow come closest to justifying his behavior. Not that it does, because he knows he's busted. So one of them is the third rail of American life, that specific racial slur, because that's the strongest word in the English language, really, and the most reviled and the one closest to an actual physical attack. And so he says that he heard that word. You're right, the source wasn't her, but still he says that one of the sources of the conflict was apparently this other guy. So he says he hears that. And then secondly, he has to say that his reaction wasn't as disproportionate as it looks on video. So he says, look, you can see she hit me and it felt like I was hit by a dude. In other words, she hit me hard. But when he says by a dude, what he's saying is, so just instinctively, I swung back as though that was the stimulus, as though the stimulus was something that it wasn't. So I wasn't, in my right mind when I did it. So whether or not he's telling the truth as to his perception of the events, it sounds bad because it sounds like someone who's had time to prepare to give the only possible explanation he can come up with that comes closest to justifying his behavior. Sounds like, I know I'm busted, and I'm trying my best to get as off the hook as possible.
Listen, he sounded like an idiot. I'm going to go back to that. It's very, very simple to me. A racial slur came from a man, but you hit the girl? Okay? That's I don't even know why he brought that up when he was talking about the incident. And then on top of it all, again, you skirted out of there because you knew, like you said, he got busted. You knew that you were wrong. Not to mention the fact that, again, listen, I want to be very, very clear because I had my radio show yesterday, and Merrill Hodge and other NFL aficionados that I had spoken to all said at least half the league is not going to touch this guy. They're not going to want any part because the second you draft him, the first thing they're going to show is the video of him hitting the girl, and they're not going to want that and try to support that to their patrons and their constituency. They're not going to want any part of it, so they're not going to touch him. But the other side to that is this: you also have folks called, and I had so many callers on my radio show yesterday talking about, yeah, but she hit him first. Not an excuse, Stephen A., but she hit him first. Okay, let's make sure we get that out the way. Nobody needs to be hitting anybody. Men don't need to be hitting women. Women don't need to be hitting men. Yeah. Let's get that out the way. But having said all of that, you are a man. You are over 225 pounds. You couldn't grab her to prevent her from hitting you? You couldn't do that?
Okay. You couldn't do that? I want to bring up one more thing about this.
You could have done that.
Yeah, I want to bring up one more thing about this because there has been things written and said about the idea that when you read or hear that someone had to have their jaw wired shut, you shouldn't need to see the video. And you and I discussed yesterday, Stephen A., about this is the way, evolution has fixed our brains, that when we hear about things, it seems abstract to us. We hear about statistics and numbers coming from parts of the world, torn by revolution and other disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes. You hear this stuff, disasters and people suffering. When it's in numbers, when it's statistics, you react one way to it and you think that's a very bad thing. When you see it, we're wired for this. When you see that visual, it affects us differently. So I would just say that try to keep in mind this video. This is what it looks like when you read she had to have her jaw wired shut. That's what it looks like. That's the reason she had to have her jaw wired shut. That's what it looks like.
I appreciate you saying that. Stephen, can I add one thing more context to this story?
Go ahead.
One other thing, you mentioned that she pushed him first, and that's never okay. Nobody should be putting hands on anyone, male or female. Racial slurs are not okay, just as say anti-gay slurs, those are also not okay. But in terms of her side of the story from Molitor, she was outside with her friends, and Joe Mixon and a couple of his other teammates started taunting and harassing one of her friends for being gay initially. So they go into this sandwich shop to kind of get away from it. And then she's kind of explaining what's going on. He follows her in. They start to get into it. Well, the point that I want to make here is this never had to happen. He could have left the whole thing alone and not instigated it initially. And I know you mentioned, obviously, grabbing her rather than to calm her down, rather than, hitting her back, which is never okay. But it doesn't even need to be that. You need to be smarter than that and not be touching her, period, and just walking away from this situation, a situation that you started yourself.
Well, first of all, you're assuming I knew that part, and I did not know that. I did not know.
No, that's why I wanted to share the context.
Yeah. He was harassing her outside and then followed her in the store. I was not aware of that portion of the story.
Yeah.
Her friends. I'm just saying, I just wasn't aware of any of that. My only point, the only thing I know about is the video that I saw, the two videos that I saw. And I was commenting about that. That's number one. Number two, again, when I sit there and talk about somebody grabbing, I'm not encouraging anybody to be grabbing somebody and putting their hands on anybody. I'm simply making the point that if you are going to react, you could react by restraining someone from inflicting violence upon you rather than having the penchant to inflict violence upon somebody else. That should be your default position, not trying to inflict violence upon somebody else of a different gender who, by the way, she's a woman, you're a man. She clearly is outweighed by, I would assume, by about 50 pounds. You are a man, you have no business punching a woman in the face. You do not do that under any circumstance. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, he was suspended for a year, and we'll see if he pays more through the draft process again, because having the visual, we mentioned Tyreek Hill and his incident, they didn't have the video, and he seemed to be just fine now playing with the Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll see if this makes a difference.
And by the way, Molly,
yes.
One other important point. I hope Joe Mixon, those boys, Max, that he was hanging with, where are they right now? He's the one in the news, all right, because of his belligerent and criminal act, to be quite honest with you. But then your boys that were with you. You see, I cover a league in which I see a lot of guys with their boys around who would step in and never allow something to elevate and escalate to that point. Where are they right now?
That's
while he's in the news, they're nowhere to be found. I hope this is a lesson for Joe Mixon. Be careful about the company you keep, because maybe if they weren't instigating stuff with you and instead they stepped in and tried to de-escalate the situation, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about him and how his future may end up being compromised.
Yes, I hope a lot of people, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in this mess. When we come back here on First Take, we're going to switch back to football, folks. Why did Iowa players not shake hands with North Dakota after their game yesterday? We'll tell you when First Take rolls on.